the Dynamics 365 Practice Show. Today we're going to be talking about pre-sales with Lucy Muscat, a pre-sales solution architect for Dynamics 365 at Hitachi Solutions Europe. It's a great show. We talk about her role, her career, tips for those wanting to transition into this role. So I think you'll find this an interesting episode. First of all, I want to talk a bit about MapTasker, a company I'm working with out of Western Australia. If you have customers with field service teams or field sales teams, you need to get in touch with MapTasker. They're an ISV I've been working with there, and their solution enables businesses with field-based teams to lower their operating costs and increase productivity using the power of geospatial and location intelligence. Their field sales for Dynamics 365 product includes advanced capabilities that empowers effective territory management, optimizes journey and route planning, and much more to enable companies with field-based teams to be at the top of their game. Field sales for Dynamics 365 also comes with a native iOS and Android app, so field reps can easily access Dynamics 365 data while they're on the go. Download your free version today from Apple App Store or Google Play Store. For full show notes for this episode, please go to nz365guide.com/134. Now let's get on with the show. Hey Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hey Mark, thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to have you on the show finally. Can you tell us a bit about who you are, where in the world you hail from? And yeah, let's just start with that.
Sure. So my name's Lucy Muscat. I originally hail from the glorious Devon in the southwest of England, but these days I live just a little bit further north in Stroud in Gloucestershire.
Okay, but that's like the very minimum of an origin story. How? Tell me a little more. Like where do you work at the moment, and what's your key role in what you do?
Sure. So I am currently at Hitachi Solutions. We are a Dynamics 365 full stack BizApps partner with even a Power BI practice too. I've been there for literally just a year, almost to the day, I think just over a year actually. And I joined previously from an organization called Cloud 2020, who were kind of at the other end of the spectrum. So as Hitachi do enterprise grade deployments of Dynamics, at Cloud 2020 very much focused on that kind of bottom wedge of the pyramid, looking at SMEs and how we could quickly and in an agile manner deliver really awesome solutions to small business. So I'm really fortunate that I've got experience kind of across the board when it comes to different organization sizes. But also I've had the pleasure of, especially at Cloud 2020, kind of having multiple different hats across the practice. So from sales and marketing all the way through to delivery and training. So I was really, really lucky to kind of get to know the full practice and the whole kind of delivery range, yeah.
Well, and so you're currently in the UK, or is it called the European division of Hitachi?
That's right. So Hitachi Solutions EU, we're based mainly in London, but we also have 6 offices across Germany and an office in France, in Paris. So super fortunate to get to do some traveling to those regions too.
I bet. And so how did you kind of find yourself working with the Dynamics stack? How did your career take that turn?
Oh, really good question. So originally I started my career, I was due to go to university, as you always do when you're sort of 17, 18, that's what all your colleagues are doing. But at the time, I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, wasn't that sure. I think the phrase is I'm a bit of a shaper, so I don't necessarily know specifically what it was I wanted to do. And so I decided that I wanted to go traveling, but I'm a bit of a girl, I suppose. I didn't want to go traveling with a rucksack. So I found the solution. I learned to teach English as a foreign language. And I did this qualification called TEFL, which I'm sure people will be familiar with, which teaches you how to teach English to people that have literally no English skills. So you can pretty much go anywhere. And it's awesome. It's really, really, it was the best investment I've ever made. And a couple of days before finishing my qualification in TEFL, I got a job offer in Münster in Germany, in northwest Germany. And I took it, and I think it was just a few days before or after Christmas. I remember specifically, it was around that time, going out there and taking a job with a really nice organization called Inlingua, which is like an international language training company. I had some awesome contracts with them for a couple of years, teaching customs officers and financial services organizations. So I got so much breadth. And to be honest, Mark, most of them spoke English better than me. So it was just I learned quite a lot more from them, particularly the customs officers. I learned exactly how you can smuggle things over the 11 borders Germany has. Anyway, so while I was out there, I had a phone call from my dad actually, who said, I've started up this practice. At the time it was around Office 365. Office 365 had just hit the market, and he said, I'm looking for a trainer. And I thought, it struck me, well, that's pretty much exactly what I'm doing now. It's the same kind of audience, exactly the same kind of people I'd be working with, and just slightly different content. And I was always taught that teaching is kind of 90% delivery and 10% content. So I thought, why not? So I took the jump, and I was actually back in the UK on holiday over Easter, and I ended up staying. So I stuck it out, and to the extent where I continued to pay the rent on my flat in Germany for about 18 months after I moved back. Yeah, so I moved back, took the job, and then that practice itself kind of expanded. So many of our clients had Dynamics already, and we were supporting their Office 365 deployments, doing some SharePoint dev, doing a bit of Link training at the time, now Teams, obviously. I think Ian was kind of inspired by some of the more detailed work involved in delivering Dynamics 4 as it was at the time. And so the business itself gradually migrated into becoming a Dynamics practice. And so I was really fortunate to be kind of at the forefront of that. So then conducted all the discovery sessions or the inception phases, and then also moved into a bit of the delivery and training. So that's where I got into the Dynamics world probably about 10 years ago now.
Wow. So in all your travels that you did, what was your favorite country?
Oh, it's a really, really good question. So I absolutely adored living in Germany. I was a French speaker at school. My mum speaks French. I did French A-level. So I was really, really annoyed actually, because about 3 weeks after I took the job in Germany, I got offered a job in Paris, and I was gutted, and I thought, oh damn it, I should have taken that. But you know what, I had the best time. The city that I lived in was a real student town, so there was about during term times, it was just in like loads and loads of students, so much fun, and they really know how to party hard. So I really probably lived my uni years out in Munster. I loved it there.
Wow.
But more recently, I think I really, really like Eastern Europe. So I've spent quite a lot of time in Romania. When I was 17, I started going to Romania a couple of times a year, and it's gradually faded away, sadly. I think I'm hoping to start going back again to volunteer in an orphanage out there, and I absolutely adore the country. I absolutely adore it. The people are amazing. The culture seems weirdly wonderful yet slightly conflicted, because they obviously have a whole series of different types of people that live there. But it's awesome. And I also recently, fortunately with you, in fact, was able to go and visit Kiev for Dynamics 365 Kiev, which was also just the most awesome city. Really enjoyed that, and love places like Poland and Krakow. And I just, love that part of the world.
Europe is so good for the flexibility, and London's so great, being able to jump and go anywhere with not too long a flight. It is fantastic.
Absolutely. I know you've been taking advantage of your London base since you've been here, Mark.
I have. Off again this weekend. So it's time to, where am I going? Mallorca. Yeah, so it should be nice. So tell me about what you're doing, kind of, the whole idea of this episode was to drill into the area of pre-sales. And tell us a bit about your role at Hitachi Europe around pre-sales, or as a pre-sales architect. Like, what does your typical month of activities at a high level look like that you're kind of doing as part of your job role?
I'm really glad you chose the word month, because if you asked me what an average day looks like, I would really have struggled. Every day is so different.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So some of the like the more obvious things that you would expect. So predominantly around building and working on demonstrations. So you're presented with an opportunity from one of the sales team, or in Hitachi Solutions context, also from the industries team. They've got this really cool, strong sense of industries where they've got really high value individuals that are experts in their field from the particular segments that they've chosen to focus on. And they'll come to you with an opportunity, perhaps it's a bid or some kind of tender that they've been produced that they've got. And then my job is to work with what we know is kind of live and ready on the business application stack, and also what's coming down the pipeline, so what's in the roadmap, to build a really, really inspiring demo. And those demos can be anything from, an hour to 2 hours, or even, I think most recently, one of my demos was a solid 8 hours. That was massively specific. So yeah, I think I really earned that gin and tonic that night.
Yeah, I bet. Are you a fan of gin and tonic?
Massively. At any one time. I'm
Yes.
probably about 50% gin.
No, I know, because we've had a few. Anyhow, moving along. So how, did you go after the pre-sales role, or were you doing consulting and then got into pre-sales? Kind of, what was that journey, and what were the kind of skills that really stood out to, you moving into a pre-sales role?
So, as I was saying, I previously was kind of working across multiple different areas of the practice at Cloud 2020 before I moved into pre-sales. Really, it was actually quite a chance conversation with Chris Huntingford, actually at D365 Saturday it was the user group summit in Dublin.
Okay, yep.
In March the year before last. And he was like, "These should be absolutely perfect for pre-sales. Not only are you kind of, I think it was mainly around the skills of being able to talk to a lamppost, which really, really helps, being able to have a conversation with literally anyone, probably too much sometimes, but also being able to tell a bit of a story around what the technology is doing as opposed to just demonstrating the technology itself." So when he came to me with this opportunity, he said, "Oh, it would be great to bring you on board." I kind of looked into what the role of a traditional pre-sales architect involved, and it really did sound perfect. So it was kind of a bit of a perfect storm, if you like. It was having a conversation with Chris and also working out what it really meant to be a decent pre-sales person.
So tell me, what are those building blocks that you see that if someone was wanting to move into pre-sales, that they really need to develop a certain set of skills? What are they in your mind?
It's a good question, Mark. So I think predominantly the key skill that I have is the ability to adapt quite quickly. So as I mentioned earlier, no day is ever the same. So it might be one day you're working on, responding to a really sort of long and wordy bid, but the next day you might need to be presenting to 30 internal Microsoft people, and the day after that it might be you're presenting to a customer across a range of different industries. So my boss, Michelle Maiden, actually describes it as kind of being like a chameleon. You've kind of got to just blend in and react to whichever audience that you might be in front of that day. And I think confidence is a really big thing. I think we've all recently, the topic of imposter syndrome has become really quite a hot one. And I think it is really important to have that kind of level of confidence that doesn't quite hit arrogance, because you have really got to you've got to go feet first into any situation, whatever's presented to you, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. So I think, so confidence, ability to adapt, and being a bit of a chameleon, but also an inquisitive thirst for knowledge. I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but you never know. As I say, you might be in a private bank and you need to understand within the space of a couple of days the kind of vocabulary that's going to resonate with the individuals at that bank. And you've really kind of got to find whichever method works for you from a pre-sales perspective. So it might be watching their YouTube videos or some previous, interviews with private banking managers or whatever it might be. You've kind of got to assume that role really quite quickly. So that's certainly a particular skill. And I think the other thing that quite a lot of the time is kind of glossed over a bit is having a really good understanding of the commercial side of delivering. So it's all very well being able to go and do a really swanky, shiny, sparkly demo, but you've also got to be quite conscious of who in the room that you're presenting to holds the purse strings, who's, the commercial owner, and also how you work with your internal commercial owners. So I mentioned earlier that particularly at Hitachi, we've got a really strong sense of the sales team. So I'll quite often work with an individual salesperson and someone that's specific to the industry that I'm presenting to. And so I'm really lucky that we then, with the client themselves, we get to kind of work a little bit as a team. And so we kind of leverage off each other. I can be, the person that's really technology focused and can be that trusted advisor. And then I can leave the kind of commercial stuff up to the commercial owner. But it is important to have that in the back of your mind as well when you're presenting. I think it's really important.
So what I found interesting there that you pulled out, and I would hate for people to overlook what you said, which was that you get and understand the industry's lingo, their terms, their acronyms, their type of sayings that make you part of, considered one of them. You go out and learn that, and you were saying there what you use YouTube videos. What are the other type of resources you use to kind of use banking as an example? If you're going to get into banking, and it could be in the industry, what are kind of the tools that you go to kind of give you the kind of, the 30-minute view of an industry and go as deep as you can in 30 minutes so you can really understand the industry that you're going after?
So to get that kind of sheep dip, as well as the videos, I also think it's quite important, if it's available, is to find some kind of financial report. Sounds boring, but it really kind of shows their kind of attitude to risk, how they approach situations, what they've got in their reserve. That's really, really important. LinkedIn, obviously, I want to get to understand who the people are that I'm going to go and see. And I try and do that. I'm not too worried if people know that I'm looking on their profile. I think it demonstrates preparation. I'm not worried about that at all. I look at Twitter. I think that's vital because that's where people feel like they can, particularly, sort of like if it's a partner in a legal firm or a private equity firm, it's really cool to see the kind of lingo they're using on a slightly more informal channel. That's quite nice. But I also try and look at sort of guilds or associations that they might be
Okay.
part of.
Yep.
So association of accountants or something along those lines where they're like part of that bigger group. But for me, the sense of community within Dynamics is massive and it's vital. And I like to try and think that every other industry has a similar sort of community, and that's where people really lay their personalities bare. So I try and find the equivalent of that as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned there LinkedIn. Are you using LinkedIn Navigator?
I am, yeah, I do use that quite heavily.
Okay, so tell us a bit about your LinkedIn Navigator game.
Oh, well, it's a good one. I think it's mainly for me around keywords. I mean, I've done recently quite a bit of work in the housing association sector, which actually it seems to have a stronger community as as the Dynamics and Power Platform
Wow.
world, which is
Okay.
awesome. They really, really value sharing and I think it's probably because they're in a bit more of a non-compete environment than the rest of us. They look after their areas and that's it, and it's great. And they do lots of knowledge sharing. And so I've done a lot of LinkedIn Navigator work around them. And one of the things I failed to mention earlier is I also try and go to as many in-person events as I possibly can that relate to that particular industry. So for those guys, there's lots of housing association conferences, roundtables, informal sort of meetups that really, really help and allow you to build a relationship with the key individuals in that industry.
I like it. I like it. You've got I like that you have a solid strategy around there. Just one last question on LinkedIn. Do you think you'd be able to achieve all that without Navigator, or is there anything like special jumps to mind that LinkedIn Navigator gives you over just LinkedIn standard?
That's a good question. I haven't had it a huge amount of time, to be honest with you, Mark. And I think I was able to achieve pretty much exactly the same as I was before. So perhaps that's a task on me, is to kind of go out and work out what the difference is. So in short, probably, yes, I think. I think that's primarily because I rely really heavily on face-to-face interactions.
Yeah.
Or not rely, but I get more out of them than I do online.
Yeah, makes
And I
sense.
think
Makes sense.
with Navigator, you just don't get that sense as much as you do with other channels.
Yep. Any formal training or certifications that you've done around pre-sales specifically?
Funnily enough, very, very, very little, I would say. There is some particularly cool stuff that Microsoft have helped self-fund or help part fund in the past. So there's kind of like the Steve Goff Sandler training, which is quite nice.
Oh, I've not heard of this.
Really, really worth a Google. It's not the cheapest training in the world, but it's definitely worth an investment. And as I say, Microsoft have in the past kind of part sponsored that. And it really kind of gives you the background on when you're in kind of a potentially high intensity sales situation, who the key levers are in the room, and getting behind people before they fall, how to really engage and build relationships with individuals. And that certainly helped. But in all honesty, Mark, I think there's no kind of second for training as actual real world experience.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of form that comes in. And I think I've appreciated the benefit of that by organizations and individuals giving me the opportunity and giving me that foot up to have that experience, and also kind of then being fully open to feedback. I think it's quite hard for us, and I think as Brits we're probably not great at giving feedback, positive or negative. And I've seen the benefit of receiving both positive and constructive feedback. It is quite hard to accept it sometimes, but it's really quite vital. And so I've kind of taken it upon myself to try and give that as much as I possibly can in scenarios where I'm working with people that are perhaps new to pre-sales, or they're in delivery and they've been brought in because they've worked in a similar project before. I think that mentoring is really quite important and quite valuable.
Interesting. What about the technical skills? Like, are you really deep in field service or really deep in sales or customer service? Or do you kind of, when you're doing a pre-sales engagement, do you bring in people that have got very deep skills in those areas based on how you've profiled the customer and really what their needs are?
Yeah, I think that's a vital point. It does really depend on what the customer's needs are. I describe my technical knowledge as kind of a mile long, but perhaps an inch deep.
Okay. Mm-hmm,
so I have the capability of putting together demos myself of anything from field service, marketing, click dimensions, all the way through to even PSA if I need, or basic sales, obviously out of the box sales. So, I mean, I can do that. And I think it's important to be able to have that hands-on experience. and it's important to understand where the key challenges and gotchas are. But then if I have the luxury of being able to bring in other members of the Hitachi team to help me, then I absolutely will. So I was recently working, funnily enough, on a field service demo that needed a little bit of configuration, and I kind of needed to understand field service really to its nth degree and what its extensibility looked like. And so I was able to bring in a couple of members of the team who were on the bench to fully understand, exactly how I could do that. And that really kind of lights up the demo a lot more. But I think the other thing to bear in mind, particularly now with the Power Platform being quite such a strong offering, is we can quite quickly spin up these scenarios that show the art of the possible, that fill in the gaps that perhaps Dynamics doesn't quite cover to satisfy that industry specific need. And so I quite often spend my time working on my complete story. And if there are gaps in my story or my personas, then I will fill those with Power Platform. I think the only challenge we have then as SIs and as delivery partners is to tell that story and to help the client understand where the traditional off-the-shelf product finishes and the Power Platform starts, and not bamboozle them too much with the art of the possible. Give them a solution that tell them it can be configured, but make sure that they understand it is within grasp and it's not just they're starting from scratch.
Yeah. Who are the other roles that typically play a part in your pre-sales engagement? Like, let's say we'll call them actors. Are they salespeople? Are they executive from your company? Like, what do you typically see as the team that goes in and engages with ultimately the intention of winning a new delivery opportunity from?
So there's always some kind of commercial owner, whether it's a business development person or the industry lead for that particular industry. Vital role, because they'll give you the context, the background, they'll understand, they'll set up all the meeting, they'll do the logistics as well, which is really helpful.
So they own the relationship with the customer.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
And then, as mentioned, it can be that we bring in a member of the delivery team that has experience with that specific project of the same kind. But generally, I'd own the relationship with them and I'd interact with them and then bring them in if needs be. And that's pretty much the extent of it. I think some scenarios there's a sales or a commercial lead and an industry lead, depending on the size of the opportunity, as well as perhaps some senior management, just to kind of give that top cover and give that high level approval and confidence to the customer. I think that's quite vital. And then there will generally always be someone with a project management hat on. So an individual who's got experience with our methodology that can explain that quite clearly, that can give the client confidence that we can deliver.
Mm-hmm. And tell me now about the handoff. So, often I hear talk that, pre-sales and sales deliver, and get a contract signed. And then sometimes there can be a hiccup between that and it, handing back to the team that's going to do delivery. How do you make sure continuity is maintained across that handoff phase between closing the deal and then that you're delivering what you talked about as part of the pre-sales effort,
Yeah, I get it. It's such a vital point. It's so important to get this bit right. And I think it really does depend on every project. I think it depends on the propensity for the client to accept risk. If they're quite, risk adverse and they're really struggling with the whole concept, and if they've gone out to market. So if it's not just a delivery partner they're looking for, but also a solution. So if you're in there for the technology play as well, and perhaps you're competing against Salesforce or whatever, whichever other solution, I think you really have to take that into consideration. And if there's a high level of, lack of confidence, if you like, then the handoff needs to be far longer and far more intrinsically linked to the delivery team. If, however, the project is shorter and more, the scope is much more defined, and the delivery team that you've got is kind of that crack team, and that the PM well, and you've got a really good relationship with them, then perhaps that handover can be a little bit shorter. So I think it really does depend on the kind of the customer and the client and how they're feeling and how they've got to where they've got to, and B, the delivery team that has been assigned to work on it. But I do think that handover is vital. I don't want to be the person that delivery is saying, pre-sales sold this and we've never delivered this, and we've heard it all before. I don't want to be that person. I want to be, actually that statement, you've sold something that we've never delivered before, should always be there. The product is releasing features every week. Of course we're going to sell something that doesn't exist or haven't delivered before. So I need to make sure that the knowledge transfer of the solution that's been demonstrated and sold, the delivery team are comfortable with.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. What tips and tricks do you have for those people wanting to get into pre-sales? So let's say they're currently in a position that they've been a functional consultant for, let's say, 3 to 5 years, or they've been a architect for 3 to 5 years, or maybe even a developer for 3 to 5 years, and they feel that they want to move into that pre-sales. My experience, particularly in the Australian market, was so many people wanted to end up becoming or getting into pre-sales. They saw that was a career goal rather than necessarily going into a role that kind of managed people. So what recommendations do you have for those people that, maybe sitting in these other functional roles within the business currently and want to make that transition?
Well, firstly, if you're thinking about it, then you should absolutely do it. It's the best decision I've ever made. I have to say, I have the most fun and I have the most exposure to the product. So it's really, the product and different clients, and it's such a great opportunity. So if you're thinking about it, certainly try and do it. From a tips perspective, I think quite a lot of consultants I speak to that I've been trying to encourage into the pre-sales team or into the pre-sales world are panicked about presenting and panicked about speaking in front of people.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And that's I find that quite odd, because I think, well, a big part of your role as a consultant is to present and do playbacks and retros. All these skills you're already doing. You just don't realize that you're doing them. So I try and encourage them to perhaps read. I mean, I've just read the most amazing book, How to Talk Like Ted, which kind of gives you really, really specific, non-fluffy tips on how to present, how to read body language, how to project, and how to kind of take a bit of a step back and slow down. I think one of the most important things, particularly when presenting in a pre-sales sort of role, is to appreciate that everyone in that room knows less than you do on the topic you're presenting on. They absolutely do. And I think it's quite important and very difficult to remind yourself of that, because you're so nervous and you feel like, even I have been doing this for years. Even I feel like the ground's moving from beneath my feet when I stand up and present in front of people. But I think it's about learning how to enjoy that feeling, learning that no matter how much preparation that you do, you will still always get that feeling. And that's fine. But also that, again, just to reiterate, you do know more than they know in that situation. And that's not arrogant. That's just the truth. They know a lot more about other topics than you do. So being that confident, I think preparation is vital as well. It's very easy to kind of spin up a trial and go into a demo and just wing it, but that's not going to win you anything. So I think really, as we've discussed, properly give yourself a sheep dip into that industry, put on that jacket that makes you feel like you are one of them, empathize as much as possible. I think empathy for me is so vital. Put yourself in their shoes. There'll always be someone in the room that is reluctant to change. We know that. No one wakes up and goes, oh, I just want to change my CRM system or my ERP system. So understand that and empathize with that, but also empathize with the fact that you might be automating a process that they're spending most of their days doing now. So be behind them before they fall. Encourage them that they'll be able to do, or remind them that they'll be able to do something else instead of that manual process.
I like it.
Yeah, so loads. I mean, from a technical standpoint, when you're in front of people, make sure you always have every single tab of every single record open. No one is going to buy a solution where there's a spinning wheel where they're waiting for something to be open. So have your records ready at the time. Even if it's a case of moving along a business process flow or triggering a workflow, have the answer ready. And don't be afraid to think around the subject. So if the client's asked you for a marketing demonstration, then they're probably going to be interested in understanding their social media. So get some social engagement ready, or think about some of the third-party solutions that might enhance some of the things that they've requested. Quite often people come to us with an RFP or a tender of an answer. This is what I need. How can you deliver it for me, Hitachi Solutions? Whereas actually, I'd like to show them some of the art of the possible on things that they might not have thought about, and actually ask them or encourage them to share with us what the driver for this RFP or this tender is, as opposed to what the answer that they think is the right answer is. And actually, don't be afraid to push back, even internally. Push back on the sales team. This approach that they're taking, it isn't quite right. I don't think it's the right solution for them. Perhaps we encourage them to, or we help them write their next submission, or we encourage them to go about procuring in a slightly different way. Don't be afraid to, if your gut's telling you that's not quite the right thing to do, it's probably not. So do it that way. My final tip, and I think most people already know this already from a technical standpoint, is I use Google Chrome to do most of my presentations, and Google has this wonderful personas or profile feature where you can jump in and out of different environments, and it remembers your credentials. So I do that heavily. So even if I have most of my demo in one environment, but actually there's a tiny little feature in another environment, I'll open it up and I'll make sure the environments look similar, and I'll switch between them and just describe, I don't know, like Twitter integration through cognitive services through this other environment.
So an example, let's say you're doing a demo showing this is what the manager would do, blah, 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 step, dashboards, analytics, that type of thing. And then you'd say, okay, this is what the customer service experience looked like. You've got those preloaded, pre-signed in, so you're not doing any authentication stuff, which is just burning up, time in a demo, and Absolutely. It just makes it run smoothly.
Exactly that, Mark. And I think also it's nice to try and make the demo as interactive as possible. The chances are these people have seen either 4 or 5 other suppliers do exactly the same kind of presentation. So think of as many ways as you can to interact with them. So I take an iPad with a Power App on it that they might want to enter data in or have a play around with, or I'll create a landing page on marketing and get them to fill it in and then put them on a customer journey. So get them interacting with it, get them see some of the outputs of your product, and also don't be afraid to have a sense of humor. I think, in fact, during my interview with Hitachi Solutions, they asked me the question, if you're in a sales environment or in a meeting or a presentation, there's always one individual that's kind of the grump. How do you engage with them? And to be honest with you, Mark, what I do generally is I take the mick out of them and I use them as my demo persona. So I'll point to them, and it gets them laughing, it gets them engaging. For people I've presented with, they always know when the same jokes are going to come out at exactly the time that they come out. But it just makes sure that everyone's kind of awake and interacting as much as possible.
So that leads into my next question, which was around, give me an example. It might not be in Hitachi, it might be in any of your kind of roles that you've been on in your career, that you've had a more than, let's say, pleasant customer, or you've had a moment where things go wrong. Can you give us an example without using names and businesses of what went down and what was the outcome? It doesn't have to be a scenario that turned around successfully, just it's a real scenario.
Yeah, I think, no, it's a really, really good one. And I think quite often we come up on this kind of scenario where, Microsoft are wonderful at providing us with opportunities and leads, they really do. And they really seem to have changed slightly recently, where they're trying to understand their partner base and provide opportunities to you where they hear about them, perhaps amongst their global black belts or their PTS, any one of those. And they present you with this opportunity. And recently I was presented with one where I kind of, in my gut, I knew wasn't going to be great, but I wanted to make sure that we gave it the time of day. And it was a Salesforce compete, and the CIO kind of had already completely embedded himself in Salesforce and already kind of signed up to the trial. And I just thought, this is just going to be so much of a challenge. But I went for it, and it was a challenge, and there was a lot of conflict in the room. And I think the way I get over it is I just think, okay, well, as long as I can explain this internally as to why this has not gone well, and as long as I know that I've completely tried my hardest to change the mindset or to get them to think in a slightly alternative way, then I'm happy, But ultimately, if this particular chap is sold on Salesforce, it's not me necessarily to be the one to persuade him otherwise, And I know in my heart of hearts that in 6 months' time, there's a likelihood that he might come back and go, this is where we're at, we're really grateful. So I think, in short, if you ever come up against these conflicting scenarios, don't be afraid to step away. There are lots of other opportunities for all of us across the space. So, you're not going to win them all as much as you'd like to. So don't be afraid to step away. Don't be afraid to say, I don't think, I wouldn't do it in such a manner, or have you thought about this approach instead, in those conflicting moments? And then you never know, they might come back. And I've seen that multiple times across my career in this particular space and in other places as well. The same went when I was teaching English. When I was teaching English to customs officers, I would get 30 new students every month. And those students would generally either be young people straight out of university or older individuals that had done their national service and done about 7 or 8 years in the army. And those older individuals were always really kind of vicious. They were bitter. Why do I have to take English? I've been speaking English my entire career, And so I'd come up against this situation so many times, and I would sit with them and, give them the time of day that they needed.
Mm-hmm. So just on this topic, how do you deal with the dicks that you come across? As in the people that are totally, like, and this might be internal, but also external. How do you maintain, if you like, your professional composure when you just have to, but you're dealing with people that you know are either out of line or there's conflict within their own. Let's say you're dealing on a customer side and you can see there's internal conflict. You mention it in regards to the Salesforce scenario there, which obviously, some companies, they have to go and look at all, but they've made up their mind, and so therefore you are just doing a box ticking exercise for them. How do you engage with those not so pleasant people without just being, you just got to, but like, what are kind of some tactics that you've used to be successful in those situations?
The number one tactic in that situation is to kill them with kindness. They're not expecting it, so it takes them off guard. They know that you are part of that box ticking exercise. So I go into it, kind of fully engaged, quite the opposite. And I treat them in exactly the same way as I treat a client who I know has chosen Dynamics and is really keen to work with Hitachi, So I think that really, really helps. And I actually was in this situation quite recently where the organization had just been acquired, was growing quite rapidly, and the VCs that had acquired them had kind of stopped their procurement process for a new platform dead in its tracks. They'd previously been looking at commercial off-the-shelf offerings where, they were going to kind of stick them together with integration tools, but ultimately they were going to go for kind of 30 quid a month for this particular area of the business and this one for this workflow. And, they felt like that was the right decision for their organization. The VCs knew differently and thought differently and wanted a platform across the organization that could scale, expanding and track to meet their needs. So that's why we were brought in to present the Dynamics solution as an offering. So you're going into this meeting knowing that there's going to be resistance. But I do my absolute best to pretend that that's not the case. And I actually just come at it as if I'm, again, using empathy, try and come at it from their situation. They've already spent 6 or 7 months prepping their commercial off-the-shelf procurement path. They think that this is the direction of travel that they're going in. So pretend like you're there with them, just be there to gently show them the alternative route. And in the end, we gave them a really compelling argument. And, they did kind of reassess and reconsider, not just because of the pressure that was coming at them from above, but because they'd given Dynamics the time of day that it deserved.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier there about, you don't win them all and you can't win them all. And, I've been in those positions where I do like to win them all.
Me too.
And I take every loss personally. In fact, I can remember them all, just the way I'm natured. How do you celebrate though your wins, and how do you get over your defeats when going after selling these projects? Yeah, what have you found works for you?
It's a really good question. I think we probably have a similar nature, Mark, and I think the losses, whilst they're a lot less than the wins, always stick with you the longest. And I think it is really important to reflect. I think it's really important to understand why, ask for feedback. Why was it? And, you never know. Sometimes, and annoyingly, it's political reasons. It's reasons because, their FD's wife works for this other, and you'll never get over that. And you just have to kind of live with it and take on that financial responsibility that you took to do the pre-sales for it. Okay, fine. Get over it. Try not to let it get you down. For those when you've really lost because your capability wasn't there, that is the hard one to suck up. And I think, try and make the best of it by reusing any of the solutions or the answers to the questions that you've generated. They will always be useful for other scenarios. As bitter as it is to look at them and reuse them, really important to take advantage of that. And actually use that as an opportunity. If it's, particularly if it's a bid for an organization in a space you've never worked for before, go out and seek out those other organizations because you'll find that they'll talk. And if one organization is sold on Dynamics, the next will be too, and they might not necessarily appreciate the input from that SI that did win, that was successful. From a celebration perspective, absolutely everything. I think it's really, really important to celebrate your wins. Really, really important. And I think kickoffs with the client are nice. They get you to a stage where you can sort of build that kind of ongoing working partnership relationship with them. That's really important. And also make sure that you share the successes within the team. At Hitachi, we do win wires where they go internally and they celebrate exactly who did what and when. And I think that's really nice. It's kind of democratic. Everyone knows who's done what and when. And it also is triggers for people to go, Lucy was involved in that opportunity. She might want to do some more internal pre-sales for this account that we've been working with for 10 years that looks like they need a similar solution.
Do you get peer bonuses?
Oh, God, good question.
Do you know what those
Not sure, actually.
No, so
No, I think.
you would know if you got them. As in, it's a cool, the company my wife works in, as in staff can give other staff a peer bonus, which is basically there's a formal submission that you make. You've got to say why the other staff member deserves this bonus, and the bonus is always £100. And any staff can give it to any other staff, but they've got to do the write-up. And of course, it goes around like a wind wire to everybody why one staff member's peer bonusing the other. And of course, there's some rule that you can't kind of set up a quid pro quo type situation. But, it's an amazing way to encourage staff to encourage each other.
That's awesome.
Business.
I love that. I really, really like that. And actually, I think that would work even if it wasn't financial, if it was something, like a 20 quid Starbucks voucher or something like that.
Yeah.
One of my industry leads, actually, she's incredible. She is always so grateful for our input. Every time we do something for her, there'll be some kind of gift and a really nice handwritten card after you've done it. And it makes all the difference,
It does, right?
It's really heartwarming.
Yep. Totally agree. Any recommendations for third-party solutions that you keep going back to? You use them over and over again, like these ISV add-on solutions that you feel confident with, that you do recommend often.
Okay, so I've got 3 that jump to mind that I use all of the time. And I think the first one's probably unsurprising, which is Click Dimensions.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I've been working with those guys for well over, I think about 8 years now. And I think they've had some challenging times, with alternative solutions from Microsoft popping up and dying off and popping up again. And I think ultimately...
And dying off? Sorry, carry on. And what? Yeah, carry on.
And ultimately, their solution has always worked, has always been the go-to, works incredibly well, and is great. It's a great demo as well.
Yeah,
right now,
totally.
I do think the alternative is kind of improving. So Microsoft Dynamics Marketing is improving, and it's getting to parity from a features perspective. I just have a few trust issues around its capability and its scalability, but I'm open. I think competition is good, and I think it's actually worked really well for Click Dimensions. It's helped them reassess what's important, and I think so for everyone. That's there's no harm in that. Then I also really, really respect Data 8. So these guys based out of the UK, they're working really, really hard to help keep data nice and clean, and they do kind of bank detail checking and address checking and a validation, and they're brilliant. Their solution is great. It's really well priced. It's really stable. They're at the forefront of everything. So they've even, I just saw on Twitter over the weekend, delivered a fuzzy search for Canvas apps, which is just awesome and just absolutely brilliant. So those guys. And then the final one that I would really, really recommend is IntroHive. So these aren't traditional ISVs from a Microsoft perspective. They're kind of newish to the Dynamics world, but their offering is absolutely incredible. We actually respected it so much at Hitachi that we've actually brought it internally, so we use it ourselves. So, we do with Click Dimensions too.
Can you tell me a bit more about IntroHive, because I'm not familiar with it?
Sure. So they describe themselves as the relationship capital people. So they deliver a bunch of different things. They integrate into CRM, but also into your Exchange mailbox passively. And they present insight back to you in a number of different ways at the time you need it. So they send you pre-meeting digest. So at 7:00 every morning, you receive an email with details about the organizations in the meetings involved in your diary. So they'll give it to you in both sort of publicly available information, some information that's behind paywalls like Bloomberg or whatever it might be. It shows you how your relationship is with those individuals involved in that meeting based on how much you've interacted with them, and also who at Hitachi holds the strongest relationship with the individuals that you're working with. It also brings back the time, date, subject, and first line of the body of the emails that have been sent most recently, whether from users internally, whether they use CRM or not. So for us, that's hugely valuable because I can see that this particular project manager was working with that company, this alliance manager was working with this particular individual. Whilst I don't get to see the full email, and that email doesn't have to be tracked into CRM, it's just in their mailbox, I get to know who's had the most recent interactions. And then post-meeting, it sends you a post-meeting digest, which is an email, and you can respond to that email. And any response that you write goes straight against the record, both the contact and the account, as a note. And you can simply write a little plus sign and then the name of a task, and it goes off and creates a task. So awesome. So I was literally in the back of a taxi the other day, post meeting, writing a note in email, in an environment I'm familiar with, and creating a bunch of tasks and assigning them to other people, importantly. So really
Yeah,
awesome.
fantastic. I'd never heard of it. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it also does things like it'll analyze your mailbox and say, oh, you've had this activity with this person, this contact isn't a contact, and it's like a one-click sync, and it does that every day or every week, depending on what you need.
Very good. Do you have a bonus one for me? ISV solution?
A bonus? Yeah, I think we should all be watching Solgari, what those guys are doing from an omni-channel perspective. They're hugely active in the Dynamics community, and they integrate with the channel integration framework, and they do all kinds of cool things like CTI, telephony, live chat, screen. So definitely keep an eye on those guys, and they're really lovely people too, which helps.
Nice. Very good. That's a great breakdown. Is there anything you would add before we get on to some quick fire questions around being effective as a pre-sales architect?
I think keeping an open mind, keeping as up to speed as you possibly can with the technology, but keeping a pragmatic view on what that means from a delivery perspective. Try your absolute best to, when in front of a client or in front of Microsoft, describe the outcome of the solution that you're offering as opposed to the suite of products you've used to get them to that outcome. That will only bamboozle them. Keep things simple, talk slowly, empathize.
Nice. Before we get on to the quickfire questions, I know I've said this already. I've got another question for you because I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this question. And that is, if I was to give you $10 million tomorrow to start up a Microsoft Business Applications SI, so system integrator, and I said, you're going to be measured not on your, financial return on investment, but you're going to be measured on the loyalty you can create with staff and the culture within the business. What are some things that you would do to make sure that you created a culture where staff absolutely loved working for, you as an SI? And what would you put in place that you think would create that level of loyalty?
God, Mark, that's an absolutely brilliant question, I think. And I'd really like to do this as well as a side note. So I think transparency for me is key. So keeping up internal levels of communications. And I don't necessarily mean, oh, we won this opportunity, or we did this, or we did that, not just spouting, but encouraging that sense of chat and communication. So, we all work disparately. We all work from home or on the road. How do you get that kind of coffee machine chat when you're away? And I think Teams works incredibly well for that, but you have to kind of encourage it. I quite often put on selfies of, demo teams or pictures of client office, whatever it might be. Anything that gets people engaged and laughing really, really helps. I think the peer bonus that you mentioned would be absolutely awesome. Encouraging that kind of internal recognition is absolutely valuable. And I think encouraging individuals through understanding how they can get to other places within the organization. So if they're not happy, that's probably not because they don't have the capacity, but it's probably because they don't have the capability or the confidence to do what it is they're doing. But that doesn't mean that they can't do something else. So it kind of goes back again to transparency and communications. If you've got a really good mentorship program in place, you will know in advance that person isn't happy or considering a move or at risk or whatever. So making sure that you're keeping that conversation going and understanding how you might be able to tweak someone's role to meet their needs. I think gone are the days of having just functional consultants and SAs and be realistic and pragmatic about what your roles can look like and how you can fill that. And I think the Power Platform's certainly changing our traditional role landscape, and then tailor that role to them. So give them different recognition based on what it is their outcomes should look like. And then finally, and I probably witter on about this far too much, but that sense of being involved in the wider community is really, really invaluable and has been really invaluable to me. And I think you wrote a post on it recently, actually, Mark, which is why organizations should be involved in the community. And I think probably some of the hesitancy has generally been around, from a management perspective, well, if people get involved in the community, they're speaking to our competitors, they're speaking to Microsoft, what's to stop them going? Well, there isn't anything to stop them going, but if you have the confidence to let them go and give them that kind of authority or, ability to go, they're going to learn so much more. They're going to interact. They're probably going to do it in their own time. And they're going to come back feeling really valued. I recently spoke to an organization, a small partner based in the UK, that dedicates an entire day of every single member of their team's time to self-study. And that can be pretty much about anything, but it's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
entire day a week. They have to obviously validate what it's about and, that's why. But I just think that's absolutely massively important. And the CEO was like, yeah, it costs me, I don't know, maybe £2 million a year. But I can't put a figure on exactly how much it's brought into the business and how loyal our team are. And I just think that's a really lovely way of doing things.
Yeah, yeah. I just feel that, there's a lot of companies that feel worried in the market that their staff are, move on. And I just feel like, hey, you've got to stop looking outwards and start looking inwards, because the issues that you have, the issues why staff churn, are generally an internal issue. I think it was Richard Branson that said that if you're not treating your staff like your most important customer, well, they are your most important customer if you're in senior management, within an organization. And so much the problem is not an external one, but an internal one, in my estimations. But anyhow, let's get into some quick fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm kind of worried, but let's do it.
Okay. What's something you will never, ever do again?
I'm kind of open to things. That's going to be a really tough one. Probably eat percebes. Have you seen those in Spain?
No, what are they?
Oh my God, they're generally the most vile thing I've ever eaten. It's a barnacle that grows in intensely rough seas, and people risk their lives to go and pick these barnacles off the side of a rock. I did it in Madrid.
Okay. It's not the one that looks like a goose barnacle, or is that different again?
I think that's different again. This one looks like a lizard's foot. And you kind of peel the shell off. Oh, it's just, Mark, you have to try it, but then you will never do it again.
Wow. Okay, here's a random one. If you could have any one fictional character as your best friend, who would you choose and why?
Oh, good question. I think I'd love to, and this is probably a boring one, but I'd love to chat to Stephen Fry. I reckon we could probably talk well into the early morning on all kinds of different topics. I'm a massive fan of BBC Breakfast News, watch it every day, have done for absolutely years and years and years. And I feel as if I'm really closely related to some of the presenters on there. I really love Bill Turnbull. He's an absolute diamond. He's gorgeous. And I know it sounds sad, but probably Satya Nadella.
Mm-hmm.
I walked past him once in a corridor and nearly fainted and haven't been the same since.
I had lunch with him.
Oh, God, Mark, stop it.
You got to win Worldwide Partner Awards to kind of get invited to those things, which was very nice. Would you rather live in an apartment in a city or a mansion in the country?
Oh God, that's such a good question, because I live in a average size house in the country at the moment. And I actually think both. I think both is the answer. What I absolutely love about working in the city is that that's where everything's going on. But I absolutely adore getting on the train and going through the valley back to the countryside. It doesn't need to be big places in either place. I don't have that much stuff. I don't crave stuff or things. In fact, I try and shirk them off as much as possible. But I do really appreciate the value of the countryside and fresh air and views that go on further than the building next to you.
Wow. I agree. What activity do you enjoy so much that it makes you lose track of time?
Talking. And I think everyone I speak with would probably they know exactly how much time we spend. But also dancing. I love dancing. Any kind of dancing.
Nice. If you could only eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Tomatoes. I'm a massive tomato fan in any form, apart from tomato juice, unless it's a Bloody Mary. And then I can get involved.
There's nothing wrong with a Bloody Mary.
No way.
Okay. What are the top 3 things on your bucket list?
Very, very good question. I'd absolutely love to go to Japan and see the spring blossoms.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to work at Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
Sad as it sounds. That's a bad one, isn't it?
No. I'll accept that. You know why I'm laughing, though.
And I'd love to probably have lunch with Satya Nadella.
Nice. All possibilities.
Absolutely.
Listen, who do you recommend as a guest for the podcast in future that's kind of along this theme that you would recommend?
I'd really recommend speaking to my dad, Ian. So he was the CEO of Cloud 2020, still is, and he has kind of launched that business from the ground and has a really, really good understanding of what it takes to make a successful practice that focuses really on the needs of the customer and provides ethical delivery. Yeah, so give him a shout. He'd certainly be up for speaking to you, I'm sure.
Excellent. Lucy, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to connect with you online, how do they do that?
So I have Twitter. I'm quite active on Twitter at Lucy Muscat. Find me on LinkedIn. I don't yet have a YouTube profile, but people keep asking me to do it. So I'm thinking about starting to do one of those in the next few months. So watch out for that.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today on the Dynamics 365 show. Full show notes for this episode, go to nz365guide.com/134. I'm your host, Business Applications MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as NZ365 Guide. While you're at my website, why don't you sign up to my mail list? It'll pop up on the screen, and keep up to date with the new posts that I'm coming out with. And I often go to this community of people for input around ideas that you want me to go to market with. So I'll often go out and ask questions about what you'd like me to talk on next or who you'd like me to interview. So feel free to sign up to that list. I'll be back again next week. Bye for now.